By 2008, the Dodge Challenger had been dead for 34 years. Gone since 1974, an entire generation had grown up, never seeing one on the road. Only in old photographs and their father's stories. Inside Chrysler, there was genuine doubt this car should even come back at all. Nobody was sure the muscle car market still existed. They built it anyway, called it the SRT8 First Edition. And what happened next didn't just bring one nameplate back from the dead, it's the entire reason the Hellcat and the Demon exist today. Ask most Dodge fans now, and they'll tell you the modern muscle era started with the Hellcat in 2015. That's not just wrong, it erases the car that made the Hellcat possible in the first place. The gamble nobody was sure would work. 35 years since Dodge's marketing team last used that name on anything. 34 since the actual car left American showrooms in 1974. That's not a short gap. That's long enough for the nameplate to become pure nostalgia rather than a living product line. Which meant, if Dodge got the comeback wrong, there was no fan base left holding the line for them. There was real internal doubt at Chrysler before this car ever reached a dealership. Genuine uncertainty about whether the muscle car buyer even still existed in meaningful numbers, after decades of SUVs and economy cars dominating the conversation. Dodge decided to find out with a trial run before committing to a full model lineup. That trial run was the 2008 Challenger SRT8 First Edition, and it proved the doubters spectacularly wrong. The engine that quietly beat a legend. Under the hood sat a 6.1-liter Hemi V8, 370 cubic inches, aluminum heads, hemispherical combustion chambers, a 10.3-to-1 compression ratio. Official output, 425 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque. Here's the number almost nobody talks about. That engine produced 69.8 horsepower per liter, and that specific output figure actually exceeded the legendary 1966 Street Hemi, the engine that basically invented the word Hemi as a synonym for serious American power. A modern emissions-compliant, daily drivable V8 was outproducing, pound for pound of displacement, the single most mythologized engine in Mopar history. Chrysler called it the highest naturally aspirated specific output V8 the company had ever built. And that engine alone wasn't even the most surprising part of what made this specific car so significant. Because how Dodge decided to sell it is where this story gets genuinely strange. Why it sold out before a single one was built. The First Edition wasn't a normal model launch. It was numbered. Every single car carrying a dash plaque with its production number stamped into it. A deliberate signal that this wasn't going to be a mass-produced trim level. Just 3 colors were offered: Hemi orange, bright silver metallic, and brilliant black crystal pearl. Carbon fiber look hood stripes, a single available transmission, the 5-speed automatic. Because in 2008, Dodge wasn't yet confident enough in demand to engineer a manual option into the launch run. Chrysler's original plan called for roughly 5,000 units. The pre-order book hit 9,000 before the first car ever rolled off the line. Buyers were putting money down on a car they'd never driven, based purely on the promise of a name that had been dead since before most of them owned their first car. The entire 2008 Canadian production run, 6,400 U.S. market cars, was pre-sold before manufacturing even began. Total 2008 production landed at 7,209 units. Every one of them spoken for before Chrysler had proof the gamble would pay off. But the pre-order numbers weren't even the most important thing that happened that year. What this car did on a drag strip is the reason it still matters today. The performance targets that still hold up. Dodge's official performance targets for the SRT8, 0 to 60, in the low 5-second range, a quarter mile, under 14 seconds, 60 to 0 braking, in roughly 100 feet, and 0.88 G on the skid pad. In 2008, those weren't embarrassing numbers next to anything on the market. They were genuinely competitive, with cars costing considerably more. Here's the detail that connects this specific car directly to the modern performance conversation happening right now. The 2008 SRT8's 425 horsepower, delivered through a naturally aspirated engine with 0 forced induction, 0 turbochargers, 0 superchargers, represents almost exactly half the output of the supercharged Hellcat that would arrive 7 years later. Half the horsepower, but every bit of the cultural impact when it landed. Because in 2008, this was the fastest, most serious muscle car America had built in over 3 decades. That comparison isn't a coincidence, it's the whole point. Because without this specific car, proving the demand was real, the engineering investment that eventually produced the Hellcat's supercharged 6.2-liter monster never gets approved in the first place. Why this car gets forgotten. If you've ever wondered why history sometimes forgets the car that actually did the hard part, this is exactly that story. And it's exactly the kind of forgotten history worth subscribing for, if you want more of it. Here's why almost nobody credits the 2008 First Edition. Today, the Hellcat generated headlines that dwarfed anything the SRT8 ever got. 707 horsepower, viral burnout videos, a genuinely shocking number for a factory car. The Demon went even further, breaking quarter-mile records and popping wheelies straight off a factory production line. Both of those cars are, by any measure, more spectacular than a 425 horsepower naturally aspirated V8 from 2008. Spectacle wins the cultural conversation. The Hellcat and the Demon are the cars people quote at car shows and reference in comments online. The First Edition doesn't have a viral moment attached to it. It has something quieter and, honestly, more important. It's the reason any of those viral moments were allowed to happen at all. Nobody throws a parade for the test car that proves the business case. But without this exact car succeeding commercially, the entire supercharged era doesn't happen. And that's not speculation. That's the direct, documented reasoning inside Chrysler's own product planning. The domino effect nobody talks about. Every Hellcat that's ever left a Dodge dealership exists because the 2008 First Edition's pre-order book hit 9,000 against a planned 5,000. Every Demon exists because of that same result. The Demon 170, the most extreme factory muscle car America has ever produced, traces its entire existence back to a numbered dash plaque and a 5-speed automatic in 2008. Without that trial run paying off, the supercharged era doesn't happen. The Demon 170 doesn't get built. The modern muscle car story, the one that's dominated automotive headlines for the past decade, ends in a completely different place. Probably with Dodge, quietly exiting the segment the way Plymouth and AMC eventually did. As of today, the Hellcat gets the headlines. The Demon gets the attention. But none of them exist without this car. And that's exactly why serious enthusiasts and historians are starting to look back at the 2008 First Edition with fresh respect. Not for what it did on its own, but for what it proved was possible. The market that almost said no. Context matters here, and it deserves more than a passing mention. The Challenger SRT8 launched into one of the worst possible moments in modern American automotive history. The 2008 financial crisis was unfolding in real time. Chrysler itself would end up in a government-assisted bankruptcy within a year of this car's release. GM was cutting entire brands. The broader market for expensive, gas-hungry performance coupes looked, by any rational business analysis, like exactly the wrong product to be betting on. And the Challenger sold out anyway. That timing makes the 9,000 versus 5,000 pre-order story even more remarkable than it already was. This wasn't a comfortable economic moment where speculative muscle car purchases were an easy decision. Buyers were putting deposits down on a $40,000-plus performance coupe, while the broader economy was visibly cracking apart around them. That's not just a product success story. It's a genuine statement about how much emotional weight the Challenger name still carried, even after 34 years of complete absence from American roads. What the First Edition is worth today. The collector market has started paying real attention to these cars, and the numbers tell an interesting story about where 2008-era modern muscle is headed. 2008 SRT8s were auctioned by Chrysler for charity at launch. The first sold for $400,000, an extraordinary number for what was, mechanically, a regular production car with a dash plaque. A second car, painted Petty blue and numbered 43 as a tribute to NASCAR legend Richard Petty, sold for $228,143.43 to benefit the Victory Junction Gang Camp. Those were charity premiums, not market prices, but they signaled early on that collectors understood this specific car carried more historical weight than its base sticker price suggested. Regular First Edition examples today trade considerably below those charity numbers, but well-preserved, low-mileage cars with documented numbered plaques are increasingly sought after by buyers who understand the car's actual place in Dodge's modern history, not just as a nice example of a 2008 Challenger, but specifically as the numbered proof of concept that saved the entire nameplate's future. As the broader classic car market continues shifting attention toward early 2000s and late 2000s performance cars, a generation of buyers now old enough to have genuine nostalgia for cars they wanted in their 20s rather than their teens, the 2008 First Edition is positioned to be one of the more historically significant modern collector cars of the era. One last detail that ties it all together. There's one more detail worth sitting with before we close this out. The 2008 SRT8's chin spoiler, its overall stance, and its general proportions were deliberately built to echo the original 1970 Challenger R/T, a design decision that wasn't just nostalgia marketing. It was Dodge's engineers and designers making a bet that buyers wanted continuity, with a car most of them had never personally owned. That bet paid off so completely that 15-plus years later, the basic silhouette barely changed, and the car kept outselling newer, more modern competitors, like the redesigned Camaro, well into the 2000s and 10s. Sometimes, the smartest move in an entire product's history isn't reinventing something, it's correctly betting that people still remember what they loved, even after 3.5 decades of silence. 9,000 pre-orders against a planned 5,000. A 6.1-liter Hemi that outproduced, pound for pound, the legendary 1966 Street Hemi. And a modern muscle car empire, the Hellcat, the Demon 170, that only exists because this specific, numbered, orange coupe proved the doubters wrong. In the middle of a financial crisis, the 2008 Dodge Challenger SRT8 First Edition doesn't get the headlines. It never will. But every headline the Hellcat and the Demon have ever generated traces directly back to this car, quietly succeeding when nobody at Chrysler was sure it would. Now I want to hear from you. Did you know the modern muscle car era almost didn't happen? And which other overlooked car do you think deserves more credit for what came after it? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. If this surprised you, hit like and subscribe. For American automotive history, most channels never bother to tell. See you next time.